For 6 months in a row, the Cornwall Senate had been deadlocked in the issue of expansion versus colonialism. And for 6 months, the single deciding vote had fallen, day after day, to the exact same delegates, the Vree, the Clist, and the humans. 6 months of the loggerhead situation had worsened every aspect of life in the Senate, tainting other commissions and committees, with no real end in sight. And to a member of the initiating process, Representative Malai Pharaoh approached the human consulate on his own, no vanguard, security detail, and only his token weapon badge of office in hand, who then waited patiently for 16 hours to hold a private meeting with the human delegation spokesperson, Cheryl Anton Willets, renowned for her fairness and periodic acts of generosity. When the meeting was scheduled, still, Malai Pharaoh waited, patient as the tide, and was admitted on the second day, still clad in their somewhat sullied uniform, and entered the private meeting space. There they took the offered seat and accepted the neutral beverage, remarking positively on the tea being served that day. Humans could reliably provide exceptional beverages, and their teas were often at the top of every trade delegation's requests and covert bribe lists. "You've shown remarkable restraint, Representative Pharaoh, in this unique meeting request," Cheryl said, her tone polite, features appearing careworn, despite the usual human tendency to both remain uncaring of the ravages of age, as well as eschewing unnatural cosmetic efforts. "That struck me as something to take note of, and give attention to, which I suspect was your point." Then she raised her own beverage, a cup of water with only a slice of a citrus fruit native to the world hosting their community. To this, Malai Pharaoh nodded gravely and said, "It was intentional because I know that humans appreciate theatrics," with a small turn of mirth to his quasi-feline features. His race, the Garlelt, were descended from the fastest, most adaptable feline-themed creatures in the same way that humans had descended from primates, save that the tail was retained for them, and the small, twitchy ears were slowly being absorbed into a streamlined presence on their skulls. To that end, I won't apologize, because this meeting, it has untold implications, all of which center on the survival of my species and culture, in roughly that order. He then set his cup of tea down and waited, demonstrating that strange patience. "We have analysed the needs of the Garelt, and determined what you need," Cheryl said, looking flatly at Malai Pharaoh, her hands placid in a folded pattern in front of her, resting on the desk surface. "It's perspective. Of the 19 worlds you wish to, and this term is used euphemistically, please understand, annex, 13 of them are occupied by sapiens either petitioning for membership in the Cornwall Senate, or soon to qualify. We interpret it as either the preamble to genocide, or the creation of an artificial voting bloc." Then she smiled, gesturing to the tea in front of Malai Pharaoh. Controlling his anger, the representative avoided showing his curled teeth, and instead settled for a throatier tone, one bordering on hostility. "Clearly," he began, "a misunderstanding is at play. Those worlds are lush with resources necessary for the continued growth, and subsequently the survival of my species. Without them we would have to strip mine a dozen colonies, and thus ruin their ecologies. Is it not the Earth itself which your people are most ashamed of, for much this same reason?" The smile he offered was far from friendly. The fate of the human homeworld was a moral and economic lesson, and one studied briefly by his own team of experts prior to the meeting, regaling him with stories dating back 200 cycles, to when humanity first went into the stars and grasped their future. What they left behind was a bitter, poisoned place, filled with gashes, flooded with trash, cities emptied of potential, and skies which choked the final birds into silent death. "Again," Cheryl said, "this is a misunderstanding, although you have a valid point, for the wrong reason." And with that, she then poured a decanter of tea directly onto the floor next to her desk, never breaking eye contact with Malai Pharaoh, her expression stony, eyes cold, tone as crisp and empty as space itself. "This was once worth more lives than exist within your entire genus. This was a poison to our souls. This simple beverage, now fought over in countless cafes and committee halls, was the death of untold millions." When it was empty, she placed a decanter on the desk. Waller's confusion settled onto Malai Pharaoh's face. His surprise blinked away, yet before he spoke, she continued to address him. "Our species, we humans, once trafficked in this tea. We shipped it, at some expense of course, after extracting territory and loyalty from countless cultures, all because it produced both money and dominion. If it could be grown, it was forced to be grown, and if it could be harvested, the locals were forced to sell it, all to one of a very slim number of traffickers, and if the locals rebelled, there was a reply. She then knocked the decanter to the floor, shattering it into 1,000 sharp shards of clear, perfect crystal. They would die by the thousands. Over and over we demonstrated this point, and thus we keep the idea and term in mind when we see other bullies. And then she smirked, looking directly into Malai Pharaoh's now fearful eyes. She leaned back, hovering over the edge of the desk, glaring at him, seeing him wince and shrink back into his chair. Gunboat diplomacy. A funny phrase, that one. It means if you don't do what we say, well, you'll see what we do. Once. Then she grinned madly. The infamous human expression, much a cause for concern in every strategy and tactical meeting. To see it, in a time of focus on violence or its risk, was to know death was uncomfortably close. No other sapient could say, with clarity, that an expression conveys so much menace. No claw, tooth, nor sheathed spur demonstrated such zeal for the stuff. She then settled back and gestured to Malai Pharaoh. Take this message to your people, that the biggest, meanest bullies who ever survived, they bred and produced my family line. Tell them that I am the finished product of what you persist in calling a death world, and that from that death world, our term, gunboat diplomacy, it carries weight and is still a sharp spear in our arsenal. Then she nodded to Malai Pharaoh. Tell them that if they make their move, we will not be standing idly at the side, wringing our hands. We will drink their fucking tea, and they will harvest their fucking tea, and we will force them to sell their fucking tea, and they have until they stop being afraid of us to understand what we might possibly mean by their fucking tea. Malai Pharaoh slowly rose, his pants now damp, teeth clicking nervously, and nodded, eyes wide in terror. Oh. He paused, his hands shaking, cup in his grip, and his mouth opened in a rictus of fearful surrender. Before you go. Cheryl Anton Willis stood and loomed over him, her height only 16 centimeters taller, yet she might as well have been a battle station. Drink your fucking tea. All he could do was nod and obey, and finally understand what she'd meant. 4 hours later, the petition for expansion was removed, with prejudice, and the worlds were formally annexed by the Terran Collective in the region, with a remarkable vote of support from the Jollet, who simply, and politely, requested a commission tax on any tea futures which may come from those respective homeworlds. Ratified and granted, the ledger said.